Welcome to this episode of Criminology Chats. I'm JR.
And I'm Ashley, and today we are going to be talking about two different cases. They either happened during or around Halloween, so they're going to be some spooky cases.
Yeah. Ooh. I didn't do that very well, I know. But anyway, this episode contains content such as physical violence, domestic abuse, rape, child sexual abuse, as well as other explicit comments that may not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
In addition, this podcast episode is only for informational purposes and does not constitute any psychological, medical, legal, or professional advice. We, in this episode, are not psychological nor legal professionals, and our opinions and comments are solely for entertainment purposes.
That is correct. Please don't think that I'm a professional. I am not in those fields there. The first case we're discussing is that of Shauna Howe, and this is not a very good case for some listeners. So again, listener discretion is advised. This is a young girl that in 1992, Halloween happened to be canceled in a city in Pennsylvania called Oil City. I'm not making this up, actually Oil City, Pennsylvania. Around 8 p.m. on 27 October of 1992, Shauna was walking home from a Girl Scout Halloween party. She was abducted at the corner of West 1st Street and Reed Street, 2 blocks from her home.
So when Shauna didn't come home, as any normal parent would, they called the police and immediately reported her missing. Search parties would go out and look for her for about 2.5 days when she would be found. One of Shauna's family members actually found a piece of her ballerina costume underneath a railroad trestle in what is called Coulter's Hole. 200 feet away from where that piece was found, her body would be discovered. For 2 decades, this case goes unsolved, even though the case did have solid DNA evidence and a haunting copycat murder.
I know that was kind of surprising, that they had some solid DNA evidence, but you have to remember that that's 1992 and they didn't have
Exactly.
the techniques then to evaluate DNA.
Exactly. Yes.
I'm going to talk about some stuff here that we know happened to the Shauna. So for listeners, just get ready because it's going to be not so fun coming up with what I have to say. She was raped and then thrown over a railroad trestle. She had died from blunt force trauma to the head and chest, and no one would be arrested for this until 2002. In 1995, another girl had been found murdered. Luckily for that case of that young lady, her murderer was found. Authorities thought maybe this person had also committed the crime here of Shauna's case, but they later found out that there was no link to the two cases. Unfortunately, a copycat kind of killing 3 years later.
Yeah, and it's very unfortunate that it took some time. That same year, in 2002, the FBI found DNA evidence that actually linked Shauna to a man named James O'Brien. So that name's going to be very important later on. So James was already affiliated or was familiar with law enforcement and the legal system. He was already serving a sentence for the attempted kidnapping of a separate woman in 1995. Which was 3 years after Shauna's murder. So after authorities questioned James, he admitted that his brother and him were staying with local Mildred Walker at the time of Shauna's murder. Walker's home was searched, obviously. So he went on to say that the brothers had told him that they were planning on kidnapping a young boy, and supposedly that they had claimed it was supposed to be quote unquote a prank. So as Walker was describing the night to the police, he goes on to tell them that the two O'Brien brothers had showed up to Walker's house with a frightened young girl.
And I can tell you also that we know now, as we did a little bit more research, that this was not exactly the true events of what happened that night. This is very typical. You'll hear from folks like Walker. He stated after they searched his home and everything that yeah, they came over with this girl to his house and he just told them to leave and they did. Like he didn't have anything to do with it. But as you'll find out as we go through this case a little bit further, that in fact he had more to do with it than what he initially alleged.
Exactly. So that goes to the point of do not believe anything a man says. No, I'm just kidding. Continue on, Jerry.
There is some truth to that. No.
Exactly.
Anyway, in 2002, also, I want to say that that's about 10 years after the murder, and DNA evidence could be actually tested better in 2002. At that time in 2002, a database that they had started creating called CODIS, where felony perpetrators where their DNA was put into the database. So they probably at that time run that DNA that they had
Yeah.
found at the crime scene in 1992 through the system, and they'd come up with a hit because this gentleman, James O'Brien, was in jail. It took them, again, a couple more years, maybe 4 years or so, before they were able to arrest anybody. And when they did arrest the O'Brien brothers and Walker, Walker started to cooperate with the police. And he told the police that in the early evening hours of October 27th, 1992, he approached Shauna and grabbed her off the street, carrying her to the corner of West First and Reed Street in Oil City, Pennsylvania, where he handed her off to Timothy O'Brien, who was waiting with his brother James. Timothy and James put her in the back seat of Walker's Chevette, and Walker had lent them that car because he had two. James drove off with Shauna in the car and Timothy holding her down in the back seat. Walker claims at this time he just returned his other vehicle he had, left, drove home.
Yeah, so basically, after that, in that same evening, Timothy and James O'Brien later returned to Walter's home with Shauna and then took her upstairs to a bedroom. Supposedly, Walker could hear Shauna yelling, "Get off of me, let me up, let me go." Sometime thereafter, Walker claims that he heard his car, the Chevette, leave the house, after which Walker discovered that the two brothers, along with Shauna, were gone and nowhere to be found in the house. However, we do know that the two brothers did take Shauna to a remote area where she was later found, known as Coulter's Hole, and she was later killed by throwing her off the railroad trestle.
And Shauna's body was found on October 30th, 3 days later. And the forensic exam conducted on the body at that time in 1992 revealed traces of seminal fluid, which was later discovered to match James O'Brien. So that's where they got that DNA, and they ran it through the system 10 years later and got a hit on James because he was in prison already for something else. In addition, swabs were taken from Shauna's mouth, and that revealed DNA evidence off
That's
of
absolutely
DNA.
disgusting.
Yeah, DNA evidence matching James O'Brien's profile as well. The autopsy conducted revealed evidence of sexual assault and that the victim died of course, blunt force trauma to the chest and head, apparently from being thrown off that railroad trestle and landing below in the creek bed. In 2006, which is 14 years later now, had Walker being charged with kidnapping and third-degree murder, and that's what he pled guilty to, the O'Brien brothers. They were convicted of kidnapping, conspiracy, and second and third degree murder. Both O'Brien brothers were sentenced to life without parole. Walker, because of his cooperation with the police, was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison. In my opinion, I know this may be kind of like gross, but Walker died in prison in 2022, shortly before he would have been eligible for parole. Now, he's the one that actually approached her, grabbed her, and took her, delivering her to her would-be killers. I think justice was served in his case, and the two brothers are still in jail, never to get out.
I think that is kind of it's hard to see nowadays where justice is actually being delivered in these type of cases, especially with young girls being sexually assaulted, but offenders and these disgusting type of people are actually being held accountable for what they did. And like you said, it's not very typical to hear this, but I am glad he spent his whole life in prison, then Walker died in 22. So I feel like, karma goes around. It's a real thing.
Yes, it
So,
is.
exactly. So keep in mind, after Shauna had died, Oil City, Pennsylvania, and all the cities and towns around them, they did put a ban on trick-or-treating at night. So that was not permitted at all. However, in 2008, a young girl actually went to the city council and was like, no, I don't agree with this at all. So she actually had a petition that had 175 signatures to actually lift that trick-or-treating night ban. She actually did this because when her and her friends would go trick-or-treating, they figured out that no one would be home in the middle of the afternoon. Obviously, people are working, whatnot. So actually, the city council agreed with this young girl, and then they actually lifted that trick-or-treating ban that they put in place or in honor of her. And so they still had trick-or-treating, but however, it's a little bit different. They had different days per town. So I don't know how that worked out, but the town and its neighbors will never forget Shauna and what happened to her. And with lifting this ban, the parents obviously became more vigilant and careful with their children. When Oil City and its neighbors are known for keeping their doors open, parents are now more vigilant and they actually walk their kids to bus stops. They don't leave them unattended at grocery stores and they don't leave them running out in the streets without knowing where they are.
Well, that maybe that's one good thing. I mean, I know when I was growing up, my parents would just say, "Hey, just be home before dark." Especially as I got into a young teen, they would just say, "Hey, just make sure you're home before dark, and if you're going to be late, make sure you call us and let us know." And that's it, you know. So I don't want to see you go,
Exactly.
you know.
Yeah.
Whereas now you're a little bit. I never did that with my kids. I think now it happens like that as much. You know, parents are a little bit more vigilant than they were back then. And unfortunately, it took these kind of events for the parents to go, "Whoa." I need to pay a little bit more attention, maybe, because there are bad people out there.
Exactly, yes, but it is nice that they did put that ban in to kind of honor Shauna
Yeah.
and show that there are consequences that happen.
Great. The second case that we're going to talk about, this actually occurred on Halloween, October 31st, 1957, and it was actually called the Trick or Treat Murder. 1957, I wasn't even born then. It's
Yeah, I
1950.
was not familiar. I have no idea what was in there. I'm from '03, so don't ask me anything about that era.
Yeah, 1957, and I think it was back in the day when guys had tight shirts, tight pants, called high waters. They had penny loafers. They
Oh,
slicked that
bring
hair
that
back.
style back.
Yeah, and now I notice the style is coming back. But
Exactly, there we
there you
go.
go. There you go. So we expect goblins, ghosts, and ghouls to roam the streets on All Hallows Eve, as we know Halloween. What we don't expect is murder. But on October 31st, 1957, 35-year-old Peter Fabano, and I hope I said that right. Think I said that right?
I'm gonna
How would
go
you
with
say
my
it?
Latin roots and I'm gonna say Fabiano.
Fabiano. Okay.
Yes, there you go.
Fabiano. His wife Betty, that's a simpler name for me, and teenage daughter Judy and Solomon had just retired for the night. Peter's stepson, Richard Solomon, had left earlier to return to his Navy base in San Diego. Ooh, he was in the Navy. All right. The family was not expecting any callers when the doorbell rang shortly after 11 p.m. Peter thought, wow, it is a little late for trick-or-treaters, but he thought maybe some parents, had been out doing something during the time of it and they had felt guilty not taking their kids out. So now they were taking them out to try to get them some candy and do the right thing with their kids. So Peter, of course, got out of bed. So smiling, he opened the door and asked, "It's a little late for this sort of thing, isn't it?" And then his wife told the authorities that she heard someone answer no, and it sounded like a masculine or another like man impersonated woman maybe's voice. Then came a popping sound. She immediately recognized what that was, a gunshot. She heard a heavy thud as something fell hard.
Okay, so that noise had brought Betty and Judy out of their beds, obviously in a hurry. To their discovery, unfortunately, they did find Peter lying on his back just inside the front door with a bloody hole in his chest. A moment later, her daughter, Judy, came into the hallway. She had also heard the gunshot and she also came out to see what was going on. Obviously, she was disturbed by the sight, but she went into fight or flight mode and she ran to her neighbor's house just two doors down to Bud Alper. And she actually banged on his door until he answered because he's actually a member of the LAPD Valley Division, and he actually called his office for assistance. Within minutes, several officers arrived. So they did transport Peter to a local hospital called Sun Valley Hospital, but unfortunately, it was too late and Peter was pronounced dead. He, like I mentioned earlier, he had been shot in the chest with a round just going straight into his heart, which would ultimately kill him. At the crime scene, detectives actually found no spent shells, nor did they find any evidence that the shooting was part of an attempted robbery, as some might immediately jump to the conclusion. According to Betty's, what she told the detectives, she had told them that her and Peter were married in 1955. Together, they actually ran two successful beauty shops, and as far as she knew, he nor her had any bad enemies. But a 15-year-old boy in the neighborhood did witness a car leave the neighborhood going really fast around the time of Peter's shooting. This is all the information that the 15-year-old boy could offer. Unfortunately, that's not like the make it or break it in this case. However, it is something very useful, despite given that there's no shells or anything like that. However, the murder weapon was not found at the scene, maybe suggesting that the killer had taken them with them. Neighbors did tell police that they had seen a car that looked like Barnett's in the area on Halloween.
Yeah, and what Barnett happened to be a neighbor. You got to understand, this is a very small neighborhood, and so everybody knew everybody. So whenever the police were asking, the neighbors were saying Barnett's car because it looked like that neighbor of theirs' car that had been speeding around there. The 15-year-old boy maybe didn't know that, but some of the adults there knew that. And then later on, of course, the police did go and look at the car, and then when they examined it, they did find sand that was similar to that was very close to what was around Peter's house. And the other thing that I want you to know is you don't find shell casings at a scene of a where a gun was used. That can mean two things. One, the person was cognizant enough and professional that they picked up the casings, or they used a revolver because a revolver doesn't throw out the shell casings, it stays in the cylinder. Okay.
Okay.
You have to discharge it yourself and take them out. So keep that in mind as we find out later in that what kind of firearm was used to do the murder. So,
Noted.
yep. Now, initially, detectives theorized that whoever did this might have worn a Halloween costume. Wow, how observant on Halloween. Yeah, might have wore a Halloween costume of some kind. They believe that it gave the killer a reason to be in disguise of some kind so it would hide their face from any potential witnesses. Of course, another theory was that Peter's murder resembled a gangland hit, so the police dug into this background. Now, that's a big stretch, right? Somebody dressing up in a disguise and killing them, or it's a gangland hit. And the reason why I think it was a gangland hit is because no shell casings were found. So they think maybe a professional, picked them up or whatever. But again, if it's a revolver, you don't have to worry about that. It doesn't discharge them. Peter had a minor record for bookmaking. And in case you don't know what that is there, Ashley, bookmaking, you know what bookmaking is?
No, I was like, why is that a crime?
That's gambling. You're a bookie. You're taking money from people. Then if they don't, if they lose, then you get the money if they win or whatever. And so sometimes what bookies do is if you get in debt to that bookie, they charge you like an exorbitant interest rate, like
Wait, so it kind of makes sense that he might be not affiliated in a gang, but maybe he
right,
had
right.
to owe debt to someone. So that's
Yep.
always kind of important.
Right. And again, that was his arrest was in 1948. Nothing that connected to him to the LA's underworld, though.
Okay.
They learned Peter was born in Lansing, Michigan. He enlisted early in the Marine Corps and served with distinction in the Pacific during World War II. He was discharged in Los Angeles and decided to stay there. He worked for a while as a bartender, which is how he met Betty, an attractive red-headed divorcee. All right. Nothing about Peter's background suggested he might go into the beauty business. However, Betty urged him to study cosmetology under the GI Bill, and I'll talk about that. GI Bill, when when you get out of the military, you have some money that the military gives you under the GI Bill to go back to school. So
Okay.
he got that. So, and his good looks and easy manner made him a natural for the business. Peter and Betty became partners in the beauty shop. It did so well, they opened a second location. And of course, they married, like you said earlier, in 1955. The couple was financially stable. Peter was an award-winning hairstylist who owned his own successful beauty salon in Sun Valley area of Los Angeles. Betty also owned a successful beauty salon in North Hollywood.
One thing I was not expecting was, first of all, Peter to go into this industry, but also to be successful and then to also do it with his wife. That is just like they had it all kind of thing.
And you got to remember, 1957, it was probably the exception that a man was involved in the female salon type of atmosphere. Most of the time, male would have been a barber because back then, I can tell you, it's kind of very segregated. Women went to one place, men went to the other for their haircuts and such.
Yes. Okay. So the only thing that actually kept their marriage from being totally perfect was a relationship that Betty had with a cosmetic saleswoman named Joanne Rabel. She was actually a 40-something divorcee. These two women had known each other way before Betty had known Peter. There was something about the way that Betty and Joanne communicated with each other and something about their relationship that kind of made Peter feel uncomfortable and kind of raise some question marks about this. This would often be the common issue between Betty and Peter, be a common idea in their arguments, and he basically told Betty that he did not want Joanne to come around anymore. Betty had obviously being a girl boss, she said, "You know what? That's not right. You're not going to have any right to tell me who I can and not be friends with." And she walked out on Peter. Betty did return, however, a month later and said that she would never see Joanne again. Detectives actually questioned Joanne after hearing Betty's story. She did admit that she hated Peter, but actually not enough to kill him. I feel like we've all been there, so I kind of resonate with her on that one. But once again, keep your eye and your mind open. So, besides that, she also claimed that she didn't have a car and that police were convinced that the escaper had escaped in one. So they were looking for someone who had a car or someone who could use a car. And she also said that she never touched or owned a gun.
Oh, okay. I just want to point out, telling of that, you said the escaper, a car to escape, escaper, not killer, but that's okay.
Oh,
That's okay.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Sorry.
okay. Yeah, the escaper. I like that term. We're gonna
Oh,
say
yeah, there we go.
escaper.
The new word.
The escaper. Okay, it's all good. It's all good. This is why I like Ashley to be on these with me.
Oh, there we
She's cool, which is right the opposite of me. When they followed up on Joan's statement, they found out she told the truth about not having a car of her own. However, she neglected to tell the police that she had borrowed one from a friend.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is a great thing to just forget about.
Exactly. And guess what? It was an old green sedan,
Would you look at that?
which may have been the same vehicle spotted at the murder scene by that young man and some of the adults. The car's owner noticed when they talked with him that there was extra miles on the odometer, just enough to make the trip from that person's house to downtown where Peter and Betty lived. Now, when detectives hit her up with that information, she brushed it off, saying, "Oh man, I just forgot about borrowing the car." Also in her favor was the fact that she was as tall as Peter. And I guess maybe they had some information there that the perpetrators were a little shorter. So, how could she have convinced him, even wearing a disguise, that she was a trick or treater? It would be kind of hard, okay? But, all right, that's, because they're saying whoever
Discriminate.
did
Never
this.
discriminate.
6 weeks after the murder, police heard from a widow, a 43-year-old, and okay, I'm going to need your help again here.
Oh, I
Please.
cannot assist you on that one.
I know. Let's just spell the name. Goldyne. I don't know if that's Goldie, Goldan,
Oh,
Golden.
Golden.
Is that Golden?
Golden Pizer, we'll go with.
Golden Pizer. Let's just say Pizer. That's easier. Anyway,
Okay.
they heard from this widow. And to the police's surprise, she admitted to killing Peter
Wow.
and told LAPD Detective Sergeants Charles Stewart and Pat Kelly, "It's a relief to get it off my mind." She said a friend of hers, Joan Rabel, talked her into committing this crime. So she is such a strong person, this Joan, that she could influence another adult woman into killing someone.
That is insane. So, to kind of go further into who Pizer is and how she knows Joanne, they'd actually been friends for 4 years, and is actually Pizer and Joanne who had been planning Peter's murder for the past 3 months. According to Pizer, all they talked about was Peter. Joanne described Peter as quote unquote a vile, evil man, one who destroyed all the people about him. I developed a deep hatred for him. So going back to when she said, I hate him, but I would never kill him. On September 21st, Pizer purchased a .38 special from a gun shop in Pasadena. I might have totally did not do that right.
Nope, you did. It's a
Oh,
38 special from a gun shop in Pasadena. By the
is
way, that is a revolver.
Okay, I was gonna ask you. Okay, very important. She did tell the man behind the counter that she actually needed the weapon for home protection. A few days later, Joanne drove her back to the shop where they did pick up the gun and already had two bullets inside for them. Joanne paid for the gun, but Pizer kept it until Halloween night when she would then give it to Joanne when she picked her up in the borrowed car, because keep in mind, Joanne does not have a car.
Is it Joanne or Joan?
Oh shoot, this is getting complicated.
Okay, it's Joan, right? Okay,
Yeah.
that's okay. That's okay. It's all good. I just want to
There we
make sure.
go.
Okay, so Pizer told the police that Joan came over to her house with some clothing, blue jeans, khaki jackets, hats, eye mask. I'm unsure what an eye mask is, but anyway, makeup and red gloves. I love the red gloves.
I think
I bet you,
IMAX
yeah. Oh, it's like, what is
to
it like?
disguise them.
And you think it's like maybe that eye mask could be something like the Lone Ranger wore, that mask or something like that. You
Oh yeah, totally,
don't know
sure.
who the Lone Ranger is, right? How about Robin, Batman and Robin, the little
Yes,
eye mask?
yes, yes.
Okay. Wow. She doesn't know who the Lone Ranger is, folks. Okay. But I like the key of the red gloves. I bet you got a pair of red gloves.
No,
So Pizer says they dressed up, got in the car, and drove to Peter's home, arriving there about 9 p.m. You notice they got there about 9 p.m., but we know the event occurred around 11. They waited until the lights went out before they approached the front door. Pizer said she rang the front doorbell once, and when nothing happened, she rang it again, maybe even again. Peter expected to see Halloween stragglers looking for some last minute candy or treats before heading home. Instead, when he opened the door, he saw Pizer. Pizer said she brought the gun up with both hands and fired. Afterwards, she told police, and I quote, I ran to the car. We left. Now, this is what's unusual. We left the car on the street, separated, and walked to our homes, but yet the car was seen speeding away. So I think maybe she was wrong with that, because I think Joan actually probably sped away. They probably sped away in the car. But Joan did tell her, hey, forget you ever saw me. Okay. On Wednesday, November 13th, just a few weeks after Peter's murder, police arrested Joan. She had been in Peter's home on several occasions and stated that she considered them to be close friends. She adamantly denied murdering Peter.
that is insane. This lady she has a track record of being very of a liar, manipulative.
It's awful, right? And then, of course, both were indicted by a grand jury for Peter's murder. Pizer explained that Joan incited her to commit the murder of a man she didn't know by painting a picture of Peter as a symbol of evil. Have you ever painted a picture of another man as a symbol of evil there, Ashley?
All my ex-boyfriends.
Oh, okay. We're not going to go there. She said all my ex. But okay, rather than face trial on March 11, 1958, Pizer and Joan pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Now, I just want to put something in here from the criminology side of the house. At least Pizer said that they had planned his murder at least 3 months prior. I think that's premeditation.
I agree.
Okay. But yet, here they are pleading guilty to second-degree murder. Joan was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. Now, what about motive? Why did Joan want Peter to die? All the reports that we could find on this case or allude to the same motive in all these articles. She wanted to get much closer to Betty, and Peter stood in the way. Joan hated him for breaking up her relationship with Betty, because if you remember, he tried to be like a man in the 50s, actually telling his wife, you can't see her. I propped it
Exactly.
down. You can't see her. And she said, what? I'm out of here. So she does leave, but comes back in a month and says she's not going to see Joan. I think she found out during that month that she didn't want to be with Joan. Believe it or not, in California at this time, homosexuality was illegal. And so people surmised at that time and speculated that that's why Joan refused to testify and accepted the plea deal.
All right. So switching our focus back to Pizer, there was a doctor who actually examined her and characterized her in comparison, especially to Joan. Is that how you say her name? Just making sure.
I hope so.
Okay, there we
We're
go.
going to go with that.
Sure. In comparison to Joan, Pizer was a very passive person who kind of became, as a doctor quoted, putty in the hands of Mrs. Rabel. And the same doctor would describe Joan as schizoid. So kind of explains the kind of status and the power in this relationship and how you could see that.
That
We actually couldn't find when Pizer left prison, but we do know that she passed away on February 11th in 1998 in Los Angeles. However, on the other end, Joan Rabel actually vanished. We cannot find any open source information about what happened to her after she was released from prison. Unfortunately, Peter was robbed of his life because of Joan's evil plan, and they also took away Betty's beloved husband and Judy and Richard's stepfather. Moving back to Betty after Peter had passed away, she had continued as a hairstylist and she actually joined a salon in Studio City, California in 1962. She actually never remarried and she died in Palm Desert, California on August 9th, 1999.
And there is a true trick or treat murder that we just discussed, okay? Because it occurred when? October 31st,
Halloween.
1957 on Halloween. So I guess my question now is, do you have plans for Halloween, Ashley? Are you going to go trick or treating?
Maybe not trick or treating. Maybe I might call it a night in.
All right, okay, good. And are you going to, dress up and wear the eye thing and all that good
Oh
stuff?
yeah, I might become actually I don't want to be Joan. I might be Betty. She was I liked her in this story.
Okay.
So I might be a Betty.
That sounds great. Anyway, we hope you enjoyed our Halloween murder episode, and we hope everybody enjoys Halloween, don't you think?
Yes, please have fun and be safe and do not kill anyone, please.
Criminology Chats is brought to you by the Chicago School. For more information about the institution, please visit www.thechicagoschool.edu. That's www.chicagoschoool.edu. I would like to extend my gratitude to the students who always participate in these episodes. We want to hear from our listeners, so please email us at criminologychatspodcast@gmail.com. That's criminologychatspodcast@gmail.com. And also, please check out our YouTube channel at https://www.youtube.com/@criminologychatspodcast. This podcast is produced and edited by A.M. Peters with additional post-production services provided by Audio Photo Synthesis. I'd like to make a special point here to say that without her, none of these episodes would be possible. So I really put a good shout out and thank Amy very much for what she does for our podcast. I'm J.R. Ringbolt, and I eagerly anticipate you listening to our next episode. Stay safe out there.
The views and perspectives shared in these recordings are intended solely for informational purposes and do not reflect the official stance or policies of the speakers of the Chicago School. Any commercial products and manufacturers mentioned are included for informational reasons only and do not imply endorsement or approval by the speakers of the Chicago School.